To this day, I can still smell it in the depths of my nightmares. It isn't the smell of gunpowder, nor the putrid stench of rotting corpses. Those are the base colors of the battlefield, scents we grew accustomed to long ago. What I'm talking about is a pungent mixture of sulfur, roasting meat, and a sickly, chemical sweetness. That is the lingering aftertaste of napalm. My name is Thomas Miller, a retired Army captain. In 1945, I was a platoon leader in the 713th Tank Battalion, though I prefer to call myself an arsonist. In that spring that decided the fate of the world, my crew and I drove a weapon, then classified as top secret, crawling onto the black volcanic ash beaches of Iwo Jima. History books say it was the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. They will tell you how the Marines heroically raised the flag, or how the Air Force rained down destruction. But if you ask the veterans who survived the shadow of Mount Suribachi, they will tell you another story. A story about how we used fire to burn the arrogant Japanese forces out from the bowels of the earth. We were no ordinary tankers. Our Sherman tanks didn't fire armor-piercing rounds. Instead, we spewed a liquid hell up to 150 yards. The beginning of all this was not the desperate black sands of Iwo Jima, but late 1944, inside a stifling, noisy, heavily guarded repair shop at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. There, a colonel named George Unmacht was plotting a revolution that would change the rules of modern warfare. This is the story of those 8 tanks and the 354 steel monsters that followed. To understand why we needed these fire-breathing beasts, you first have to understand what we faced in 1944. The situation in the Pacific Theater was shifting dramatically. From Midway to Guadalcanal, we had been winning, but the cost was rising steeply. The Japanese no longer launched the foolish banzai charges of the early war. They had gotten smarter, or rather, more insidious. I was on Saipan at the time. The fighting there was a nightmare. "Lieutenant Miller, where is that fire coming from?" my driver screamed over the radio. I peered through the periscope of my M4 Sherman. The field of view showed nothing but dense jungle and jagged rocks. But that was exactly the problem. The Japanese had vanished. They no longer built defensive lines in the open. They had burrowed underground. In the Mariana Islands, the Japanese utilized natural caverns and hand-dug tunnels to construct a defensive web like a spider's nest. Our 75mm tank guns were useless against them. High explosive shells merely chipped the rocks around the cave mouths. Armor-piercing rounds drilled into the dirt without even detonating. The infantry had it even worse. To clear a machine gun pillbox hidden behind brush, the Marine boys had to crawl forward under crossfire, burdened by heavy M2 flamethrowers. The M2 had a pitiful range of only 20 to 30 yards. This meant the flamethrower operator had to crawl within spitting distance of the Japanese muzzles to fire. I saw the scene play out too many times. A brave flamethrower operator would stand up, and before he could pull the trigger, a Japanese sniper would hit the fuel tank on his back. In an instant, that young life turned into a screaming fireball. That was true purgatory. "We can't fight like this," my company commander said that night at a temporary camp on Saipan, smoking a cigarette as he watched a distant ridge still burning. "If we keep this up, how many men will we lose by the time we land on Japan's mainland, or that damn Iwo Jima? 100,000? 500,000? We had tried using flamethrowers mounted on light tanks, the M3 Stuart modified into the Satan. That was the first generation. We used them on Saipan and Tinian. While safer than infantry carrying tanks on their backs, the Satan was too fragile. Its armor was paper-thin. Japanese 37mm anti-tank guns and even heavy machine guns could punch right through it. Furthermore, its range was still too short, a meager 40 to 60 yards. If the Japanese were hiding in deep tunnels or fortresses halfway up a mountain, the Satan was just a sitting duck. We needed harder armor, heavier firepower, and most importantly, longer range. Just as I was despairing over this game of cat and mouse, a transfer order changed my fate. In October 1944, I received orders from the Chemical Warfare Service, CWS, of the Pacific Theater. It contained just a few lines. Lieutenant Thomas Miller, report immediately to Schofield Barracks, Oahu, Hawaii, to participate in Special Project, classification, top secret. I left the corpse stench of Saipan and boarded a transport ship for Pearl Harbor. At the time, I didn't know I was about to witness the birth of a monster. The Hawaiian sun was dazzling. Compared to the mud and blood of the front lines, Oahu was paradise. But I had no time for beaches and beer. A jeep whisked me and several other bewildered officers deep into Schofield Barracks. This was the headquarters of the U.S. Army Pacific Chemical Warfare Service. Greeting us was a burly man with sharp eyes, Colonel George Unmacht. He was the head of the CWS in the Pacific. In those days, chemical warfare units were usually seen as second-line troops, managing poison gas, which neither side used, and smoke generators. But Unmacht was different. He was a man of action and a bit of a madman. He didn't just want to make smoke, he wanted to manufacture destruction. Gentlemen, welcome to my workshop. Colonel Unmacht stood before a massive map of the Pacific, holding a pointer directed at a tiny black dot, Iwo Jima. Intelligence indicates the Japanese are turning this island into a fortress. Unmacht's voice was low and powerful. Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander, is an engineering genius. He has dug nearly 11 miles of tunnels on that island. Bunkers, pillboxes, spider holes. It is a hell made of concrete and volcanic rock. He turned, staring dead at us. The Marines will land in a few months. If we use the old ways, sending infantry to die with flamethrowers on their backs, or using those flimsy M3 light tanks, we will bleed dry on that island. We need a new weapon. He flipped a switch on the table, and soldiers pulled back a canvas tarp, revealing a tank parked behind it. It was a brand new M4A3 Sherman medium tank. It looked ordinary, except its main gun barrel looked a bit odd. This is our future. Unmacht patted the cold armor. We don't call it a Sherman. In this project, it is the POA CWS H1. That complex code meant Pacific Ocean Areas, Chemical Warfare Service, Hawaii, Model 1. It sounded bureaucratic, but we later gave it a punchier name, Zippo, or simply the Fire Dragon. I know what you're thinking. Unmacht looked at our skeptical faces. Isn't this just a Sherman? Wrong. This is a mobile volcano. The colonel began to explain his plan. It was a crazy engineering miracle. At the time, the Army brass in Washington wasn't actually interested in mounting large flamethrowers on Shermans. The bureaucrats thought the M2 infantry flamethrower and the M3 Satan were sufficient. They had even rejected proposals for this, but Unmacht didn't care. He used his authority within the theater to launch this underground project without formal approval from Washington. He wasn't just modifying tanks, he was fighting bureaucracy and Japanese fortifications simultaneously. Our goal is, Unmacht held up one finger, a range of 150 yards. A murmur went through the crowd. 150 yards? That was a fantasy. Current flamethrowers could barely reach 20 or 40 yards. To throw fire 150 yards required not only immense pressure, but also special fuel. That's impossible, Colonel, a major from Ordnance challenged. The liquid would atomize at that distance. It wouldn't burn the target. Unmacht smiled slyly. That's if you only use gasoline. But what if we spice up the gas? That word became concrete in my mind for the first time, napalm. For the next few weeks, it was like being back in school, except the curriculum was how to manufacture death. Unmacht's team didn't just include Army chemical experts. He had recruited an unexpected group of allies, the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, the legendary Seabees. These Navy engineers were true geniuses. Give them a pile of scrap metal and a welding torch, and they could build you an aircraft carrier. In the secret workshops of Schofield Barracks, Army tankers and Navy welders worked day and night. As a tank commander, my job was to assist them in testing how these modifications affected the tank's mobility and combat effectiveness. I watched these Seabees perform surgery on the Shermans. The core component was the Flamethrower, codenamed CBH-1. Fitting this thing inside isn't easy, a grease-covered Navy chief petty officer told me, pointing at the Sherman's turret. Normally, the Sherman's main gun was a 75mm cannon. To maintain secrecy and confuse the enemy, Unmacht decided to keep the appearance of the main gun. It was a brilliant design. We installed the flame tube right alongside the 75mm barrel, which was now a dummy. From a distance, it still looked like a standard Sherman. If the Japanese saw it, they would assume it fired high-explosive shells and hide deep in their bunkers, which was exactly what we wanted. "It's a master of disguise," the chief laughed, "and a lethal liar." To accommodate the massive fuel tanks, we ripped out the internal ammunition racks. But that wasn't enough. The CBH-1 system required immense pressure to project the fuel. We installed huge gas cylinders and fuel tanks at the bottom of the turret basket and on the hull floor. The tank became a mobile bomb. Inside, we carried hundreds of gallons of highly volatile napalm. As a commander sitting inside, I often felt a chill down my spine. If an armor-piercing round penetrated and detonated the fuel tanks, we wouldn't even have time to write our wills. We'd be turned to ash in an instant. But Unmacht assured us the risk was worth it. Because with this, you won't need to plug enemy gun ports with your own flesh and blood on that damn beach. The core difficulty of the modification was range. To reach 150 yards, we needed extremely high pressure, but too much pressure would cause the fuel to mist at the nozzle, turning into a giant fireball instead of a stream. A fireball only burns the surface. We needed a liquid fire whip that could drill into bunkers and flow down tunnels. This was where napalm came in. In the barracks chemical lab, I saw the magic powder, aluminum soap mixture. When mixed and stirred with ordinary gasoline, it turned into a sticky, gel-like substance. "This stuff is disgusting," my gunner said the first time he saw the mixed napalm. "Looks like snot." But this snot was lethal. Not only did it burn longer and hotter, over 1,000 degrees Celsius, but most importantly, it had weight and viscosity. When ejected at high pressure, it didn't disperse immediately. It flew toward the target like a burning rope. Once it stuck to anything, concrete, wood, or skin, it never came off until it burned out. Furthermore, this burning mixture consumed massive amounts of oxygen and produced toxic carbon monoxide. This meant that even if the flames didn't directly touch the Japanese hiding deep in the tunnels, suffocation and poison gas would kill them. This was the core of Unmacht's tactics. We didn't need to blow up the bunker. We just needed to turn the bunker into a tomb. Time moved to January 1945. The code name for the Battle of Iwo Jima, Operation Detachment, was set. The landing date was February 19th. Despite the round-the-clock work of Unmacht's team, the modification progress was plagued by part shortages and technical glitches. The plan was for mass conversion, but by the end of January, only 8 POA-CWSH-1 Sherman tanks were fully combat-ready. Just 8. Facing the impending tens of thousands of Japanese troops and thousands of bunkers, these 8 tanks seemed like a drop in the bucket. But these 8 were our seeds. They were urgently assigned to the invading forces. Although this was an army project, the The Marines were landing first on Iwo Jima. These 8 incredibly precious flame tanks were secretly shipped to the staging area to be attached to the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions. I was lucky enough to be assigned as an advisor and temporary commander for one of the tanks, responsible for testing performance in actual combat and training the Marine crews who would take over. Our tanks were painted in marine olive drab with various graffiti on the sides. My tank had Hell's Breath painted on the barrel. The final test before departure took place at an abandoned quarry on Oahu. It was an afternoon in mid-January 1945. We were to demonstrate this new weapon to senior officers, including Admiral Nimitz. My tank sat on the undulating slope. In that moment, my palms were sweating. If we messed this up, the whole project might be scrapped. Hell's Breath, commence attack. The order came through the headset. I should have been nervous, but as I gripped the special firing handle, a strange calm washed over me. Target, 140 yards front, concrete bunker simulation. I aligned the periscope, adjusting the turret. In the past, at this distance, I could only pray a shell would hit the embrasure. But now... Fire! I pressed the switch. A low roar came from the right side of the turret. Even through the thick armor and noise-canceling headset, I could feel the hull vibrate. Then, a blindingly bright column of fire erupted. It wasn't a spectacular, but loose flame. It was a tight, dark red liquid column. It sliced through the air like an angry red dragon carving a perfect arc across the sky. 1 second. 2 seconds. The fire dragon slammed precisely into the embrasure of the concrete bunker 140 yards away. But it didn't end there. Upon impact, the liquid napalm didn't vanish. Like water, it splashed through the slit and flowed all over the bunker's surface. Then, with a booming sound, the entire bunker was swallowed by flames. Black smoke billowed up, and that familiar, sickeningly sweet scorched smell instantly filled the air. The radio was silent for a full 5 seconds. Then came Colonel Unmacht's voice, unable to suppress his excitement. The Japanese are in trouble now. Yes, they were in big trouble. We had proven that from a safe distance, outside the range of Japanese anti-tank grenades and satchel charges, we could deliver destruction right to their doorstep. In late January 1945, we loaded these 8 darlings onto tank landing ships, LSTs. It was a highly secret operation. All flame nozzles were covered with canvas. They looked just like ordinary Sherman tanks. During the voyage, we studied aerial reconnaissance photos of Iwo Jima. The photos showed that this pork-chop-shaped island was densely packed with fortifications. Mount Suribachi loomed like a giant at the southern tip, controlling the entire landing beach. Look at these black dots, the intelligence officer pointed to the shadows on the photo. Every dot could be a machine gun nest or an entrance to an underground city. The atmosphere in the ship's hold was oppressive. Everyone knew this would be a meat grinder of a battle. The Marines were cleaning their M1 Garands, while we checked the hydraulic pump pressure readings over and over again. The code name for these 8 tanks was Zippo. We were the first batch. If we succeeded, Colonel Unmacht promised to modify more tanks to send to the front. If we failed, Iwo Jima would become the grave of countless American soldiers. Dawn, February 19th. The sea was covered with warships. The battleship's massive guns were pounding Iwo Jima. The entire island seemed to be trembling. I stood on the deck of the LST, looking at the smoking volcano in the distance. Although I had seen hell on Saipan, I knew the real hell was just now asking for our tickets. Sir, fuel tank pressure normal, napalm mixed, my loader, now better called the mixer, reported to me. Good. I buckled my helmet and climbed into the turret. Let's go light a fire for the Japanese. As the landing craft doors slowly opened, The salty sea spray and the smell of sulfur hit my face. On that black volcanic ash beachhead, countless Marines were being slaughtered. Japanese artillery and machine guns were firing wildly from places we couldn't see. But this wasn't just an amphibious assault. This was the first true test of mechanized flame warfare. 8 Zippos, carrying thousands of gallons of napalm, roared toward the beach amidst the clatter of tracks. We were going to change history, but in that moment, I only hoped we would survive crossing that beach of death. February 19th, 1945, 8:59 a.m. Sitting in the turret of Hell's Breath, I could feel the air trembling. That isn't a metaphor, it was a physical vibration. Thousands of rockets and heavy artillery shells were turning every inch of Iwo Jima upside down. Looking through the narrow observation slit of the LST, the island seemed to be burning, collapsing, ready to sink into the sea. But I knew it wouldn't. That Japanese general, Tadamichi Kuribayashi, was like a spider waiting in his web, crouching in the underground grid he had woven, patiently waiting for the moment the shelling stopped. All vehicles, prepare to wade. The landing commander's voice came through the headset, laced with harsh static. Our LST shuddered violently as it hit the sandbar. The massive ramp lowered slowly, and blinding sunlight mixed with the rushing smell of sulfur instantly flooded the dim hold. "Blowers on full. Good luck, Captain Miller." A crewman gave me a thumbs up, but his eyes were filled with pity. "Driver, forward," I commanded. Hell's Breath roared, tracks grinding over the slick steel deck, and plunged into waist-deep seawater. The ocean washed over the tracks, slamming against the armor beneath the hull. I stared fixedly at the beach ahead. It wasn't the golden sand I'd seen in Hawaii, nor the white coral sand of the Marianas. It was black, pure, dead black, volcanic ash. It was coarse grit accumulated from thousands of years of eruptions, soft as quicksand. When we finally climbed onto the beach, I immediately realized we were in trouble. "Sir, tracks are slipping," Driver Johnson shouted in the headset. "This ground gives way." Our specially modified Sherman was several tons heavier than the standard model. To accommodate the thicker armor, massive internal fuel tanks, and high-pressure gas cylinders, we had sacrificed mobility. Now, in this sector known as Red Beach 1, we were like an iron rhinoceros stuck in a swamp, tracks spinning wildly, kicking up clouds of black grit. And right then, the shelling stopped. There was a moment of silence, more terrifying than the roar. Then death began his roll call. Even after 2 years in the Pacific, I had never seen such concentrated firepower. It wasn't coming from a specific line, but from everywhere. From the slopes of Suribachi, from the dunes ahead, even from the seemingly flat ground beneath our feet. Mortar shells fell like rain. I couldn't see where the enemy was, only the Marines landing ahead of us, falling in swathes like harvested wheat. "Button up," I roared, retracting into the turret and pulling the heavy hatch shut. Clang, clang, clang! Machine gun bullets hammered the side of our turret, making a sound that set my teeth on edge. I pressed against the periscope, trying to find targets in the chaos. But all I saw was despair. The infantry was pinned flat on the black beach. They tried to dig foxholes, but the volcanic ash was like flour. As fast as they dug, it collapsed. There was no cover. A standard M4 Sherman that had landed with us tried to rush the first terrace, but its belly got hung up on a high sand berm, tracks spinning in the air. Seconds later, a Japanese 47mm anti-tank shell hit it squarely in the flank. I watched black smoke pour from the tank. The crew struggled to crawl out, only to be instantly cut down by machine guns. "Damn it! We have to move!" I slapped Johnson's shoulder. "Don't go straight! Zigzag! Grind toward the back of that dune!" Our 8 secret weapons were scattered across the long landing beach. If we were destroyed before firing a shot, Colonel Unmacht's work would be for nothing, and more importantly, these Marines would lose their last hope. The first hour after landing was pure chaos. We barely managed to crawl over the first berm and paused in a relatively hidden depression. I made radio contact with a company commander from the 5th Marine Division. due to severe interference, I had to risk opening the hatch and popping my head out. A blood-soaked Marine sergeant rolled up next to my tank, clutching a walkie-talkie. "You the boss of this iron turtle?" he roared, voice hoarse. "Can you help us take out that damn pillbox up ahead? My platoon is half dead already." "Which pillbox?" I asked. "That one." He pointed to an unassuming mound about 120 yards ahead. "Can't see the gun, but the moment we move, it spits fire." I ducked back into the turret and adjusted the periscope. It looked like nothing, just scattered volcanic rocks and dead brush. But under high magnification, I faintly saw a narrow slit at ground level, an extremely concealed firing port, perfectly placed for mowing the lawn. Regular tanks were useless against this target. High explosive shells would just kick up dirt. Armor-piercing rounds would punch right through the mound and fly out the back. "Loader." "No, mixer." I took a deep breath and keyed the intercom. "Prepare main system." The atmosphere inside the tank instantly solidified. My crew knew what we were carrying. It was 1,200 gallons of death. "Pressure normal, igniter ready." "Johnson, traverse hull, right 15 degrees. Gunner, target front, distance 130 yards, beneath those black rocks." Our barrel turned slowly. That tube, disguised as a 75mm cannon, was actually the projection tube, and right next to it, the small high-pressure nozzle was ready to strike. Outside, the Marine sergeant was still shouting, probably thinking we were the cowardly type who would fire a few random shots and retreat. He didn't know he was about to witness history. "Ignite!" I squeezed the red firing paddle. There was no deafening bang like a traditional cannon. Instead, there was a bone-chilling hiss like a giant beast inhaling. High-pressure gas drove the piston, squeezing the viscous napalm mixture out of the nozzle at 300 pounds per square inch. At the muzzle, an electric spark ignited the mixture. An orange-red light instantly illuminated the dim battlefield view. Under the sergeant's terrified gaze, a liquid whip of fire, 130 yards long, ignored the sea breeze and lashed straight toward the mound. This was completely different from the M2 flamethrowers on infantry backs. The M2 sprayed a fluffy cloud of flame that wind could disperse, with very short range. The CBH-1 system sprayed a dense, heavy stream of oil. It was as stable as a stream from a high-pressure water cannon, except the water was boiling fire. The fire dragon slammed precisely into the front of the bunker. There was no explosion. The horror was in the flow. The ignited napalm was like living magma, plastering itself over the bunker's observation slit and then drilling inside through the cracks. The excess fuel didn't extinguish. It hung on the bunker's surface, burning violently, sending black smoke straight up. 3 seconds later, a muffled whump came from inside that seemingly indestructible mound. Immediately after, I saw 2 figures engulfed in flames, trying to crawl out of the side trench, but they collapsed after a few steps, curling into charred shapes. Mother of God! The sergeant forgot to dodge bullets, staring blankly at the scene. "Effect confirmed," I scribbled in my logbook. "Range coverage effective. Adhesion excellent." "Hey, big guy!" The sergeant snapped out of it, banging wildly on the tank's armor. "That was incredible. Do it again. There's another nest in the draw to the left." In that moment, I knew we had succeeded. We were no longer a burden. We were the saviors of this black hell. As our 8 Zippo tanks gradually advanced, the tactical situation locally began to shift. The Japanese defense was built on crossfire and concealment. They didn't fear shelling because they were underground. They didn't fear infantry charges because they had infinite machine gun ammo. But they hadn't anticipated this weapon. Over the next few hours, we cleared Japanese strongpoints one by one, like surgeons performing an operation. Our tactics matured quickly. Usually we'd have the Marine infantry conduct fire reconnaissance to bait the Japanese into revealing their positions. Once a target was confirmed, infantry would mark it with smoke grenades or guide us directly via the tank's rear telephone. Hell's breath would rumble past the pinned-down infantry, stopping at a safe distance of 100 to 150 yards, just outside the range of Japanese magnetic anti-tank mines and suicide bombers. Then came that terrifying hiss. Once, we encountered a double-decker concrete blockhouse guarding a key approach to Airfield Number 1. 2 standard Shermans had already been destroyed by it, their wrecks still burning. "Let me handle it," I told the company commander over the radio. This time, we used a new tactic called the wet shot. "Don't ignite yet," I told the gunner. "Spray raw fuel." The high-pressure nozzle spewed a stream of unlit napalm mixture. The sticky liquid looked like a transparent, poisonous snake, splashing over the blockhouse's firing slits and surrounding rocks, even flowing into the trenches in front. The air instantly filled with a pungent chemical stench. The Japanese seemed stunned, not knowing what this was. Now, ignite. The second shot carried the spark. When that single spark touched the massive amount of fuel sprayed earlier, the entire area instantly experienced a small thermobaric explosion. With a loud boom, flames not only covered the blockhouse, but flashed down the fume-filled trenches for dozens of yards. Through the periscope, I saw the entire defensive position turn into a sea of fire. This fire didn't need to touch a man to kill him. It instantly sucked the oxygen out of the surrounding hundreds of yards. The Japanese hiding deep inside died painfully from suffocation and inhaling superheated carbon monoxide. It was a cruel way to die. Extremely cruel. As a Catholic, I felt a wave of nausea in that moment. But when I turned my head and saw the young Marines finally charging across that death zone under the cover of the flames, cheering as they took the position, my guilt vanished. This is war. If we didn't burn the enemy, my brothers would die. The math was simple. Night fell on Iwo Jima. But this wasn't the start of peace. It was an escalation of terror. The Japanese were masters of the night raid. They would emerge like ghosts from holes we thought we had cleared, clutching bayonets and grenades, creeping toward American foxholes. That night, our 8 Zippo tanks didn't retreat to the beach, but were ordered to form a perimeter defense to protect the forward Marine command post. We circled the wagons, guns facing out. But I knew that in a close-quarters melee, my long-range flamethrower was limited, even dangerous. If I fired at point-blank range, splashing fuel might burn friendly troops or even ourselves. But I had another trick. Colonel Unmacht hadn't just modified the main gun. He had installed small auxiliary nozzles around the tank. Though this feature hadn't been combat tested, it was around 2 a.m. when flares swayed in the sky. Suddenly, I heard urgent footsteps clattering on the armor plating. "Someone's on the hull," Johnson screamed. "Japanese human bullets." They were trying to jam satchel charges into our vision slits or tracks. "Don't panic." I drew my M1911 pistol, but I couldn't shoot through the armor. Marine machine guns opened up around us, but in the dark, it was hard to tell friend from foe. "Activate external defense spray," I roared. Although not the primary function of the CBH-1, we could vent some unlit fuel vapor through pressure relief valves and ignite it with exhaust or a signal flare. But that was too risky. In the end, what saved us was another brother tank. "Thomas, hold still. I'll scratch your itch," came the voice of that tank's commander over the radio. Immediately, a precise, short burst of flame swept across our roof from the side. I could feel the heat even through the steel plates. I heard a few screams, then the sound of heavy objects rolling off. That crazy bastard had given us a shower with his flamethrower. Luckily, our seals were good, and the burst was extremely short. The next morning, I saw 3 charred Japanese bodies beside the hull. They had explosives strapped to them, less than half a meter from my hatch. That morning, a Marine colonel walked over. His uniform was dyed black by volcanic ash, his eyes bloodshot. He looked at our tank like he was looking at an altar. "Captain Miller," he said hoarsely, "I don't know who invented this thing, But I tell you, without you fire monsters, we might have been pushed back into the sea last night. He handed me a flattened cigarette and pointed to Mount Suribachi in the distance. This is just the opening act. See that mountain? There are hundreds of caves up there. I want you to burn it bald. I lit the cigarette and took a deep drag. The smell of sulfur, roast meat, and napalm filled my nose once again. With pleasure, sir, I replied. This was just the first day. Those 8 tanks proved Unmacht right on D-Day. But this was only the beginning. The real test, the multi-layered fortresses buried deep in the belly of Mount Suribachi, was waiting for us. We needed more fuel, more tanks, and harder hearts. War is not just about killing. It's about logistics. For our 8 special tanks, supply didn't just mean survival. It was a gamble with the Reaper. D+2, third day after landing, February 21st. The napalm in Hell's Breath was bottoming out. Over the past 2 days, we had burned nearly 1,000 gallons of fuel and cleared at least 20 bunkers. But the cost was visible. A section of my side skirt was blown off, a periscope had cracked, and the hull was pockmarked with silver divots from machine gun fire. We needed to feed. On Iwo Jima, there were no gas stations. We had to retreat to a relatively safe depression near the beach, dubbed the service area, though to me it looked more like a shooting gallery. Responsible for replenishing our ammo were, once again, those magical Seabees. Captain Miller, bring your big boy over here. A Master Chief waved from beside a modified truck. On that truck sat a massive mixing vat, a makeshift battlefield napalm mixing station. Mixing highly volatile napalm less than a kilometer from the front lines was like smoking on a powder keg. Japanese mortar shells landed nearby periodically, spraying black sand everywhere. Make it quick! I jumped out of the turret, my legs feeling like lead. The refueling process was nerve-wracking. The engineers dragged thick hoses to the intake port at the bottom of our tank. The air filled with that familiar, sickeningly sweet chemical smell. You know, sir, a young sailor operating the pump said as he wiped sweat from his soot-blackened face. When we made this stuff in Hawaii, we didn't think we'd actually use it in a hellhole like this. It saved our lives, kid. I handed him a cigarette but didn't dare let him light it. Just don't let us blow up here. If a mortar shell hit this truck or my tank right now, everything within 100 meters would turn to ash in an instant. Every second of waiting felt like a century. Finally, the roar of the pump stopped. Full, 1,200 gallons, enough to burn half the mountain. The engineer patted the tank's armor. I climbed back into the turret and glanced at the grim volcano looming to the south, Mount Suribachi. Like a crouching beast, it watched us coldly. Thanks, brother. I latched the hatch. We're going to give that mountain a shave. Mount Suribachi was 169 meters high. Not tall for a mountain, but for an attacker, it was a vertical wall of death. The Japanese had dug a 7-layer tunnel network circling the entire mountain. Every rock crevice, every natural-looking fold could hide a Type 92 heavy machine gun or an anti-tank gun. The weakness of conventional tanks was exposed here. Insufficient gun elevation. When standard Shermans tried to attack fortifications halfway up the mountain, their barrels couldn't elevate high enough to reach the targets. They could only sit helplessly while Japanese troops above picked them off with grenades and anti-tank rifles. But this was exactly where the POACWSH-1, our Zippo, shined. Target, 2 o'clock, elevation 50, that protruding rock platform. I locked onto a cave mouth spitting fire through my periscope. A Japanese mortar was there, pinning down the Marines below. Angle's not enough, sir, the gunner shouted. Main gun won't go higher. Forget where the barrel points, I roared. We're using fluid dynamics. Increase pressure, raise elevation. We're going to lob the fire up there. This was the unique advantage of the flamethrower. Fire wasn't a bullet flying in a straight line, it was a liquid with weight. Ignite. This time, we didn't fire flat. Under the dual action of gravity and pressure, the orange-red fire dragon traced an incredibly high parabola in the air. It was like a rainbow of death that arced over a large shielding rock and landed precisely on that platform. The liquid fuel flowed with gravity, pouring directly into the mortar position. Even over hundreds of meters and the engine noise, I seemed to hear the shrill screams. Seconds later, the ammunition on the platform detonated, and a brilliant firework exploded halfway up the mountain. "Good hit!" the infantry captain cheered over the radio. "Just like watering flowers with a hose. Keep watering." That afternoon, we were like tireless gardeners, performing a brutal watering on this black wasteland. We used the parabolic nature of the flame to clear dead angles that conventional firepower couldn't touch. However, the Japanese didn't just roll over. As we approached the foot of the mountain, the fighting became more treacherous. Kuribayashi's tactic was die hard, never retreat. He ordered soldiers to stay in spider holes, one-man foxholes. These holes had openings only the size of a manhole cover, camouflaged with sod and sand. Once a tank passed, they would pop out to attack the tank's rear or belly. While attacking a gorge on the east side of Suribachi, my wingman and I got into trouble. The terrain here was rugged, littered with massive boulders. Our vision was severely restricted. Suddenly, the brother tank jerked to a halt. "My track! Damn it, I've lost a leg!" its commander screamed over the radio. A close-range anti-tank rocket, or maybe a mine, had blown off its right track. In that instant, the surrounding ground seemed to come alive. Dozens of Japanese soldiers threw off camouflage covers and swarmed toward the crippled tank like ants from all directions. They carried satchel charges and magnetic mines. "Support! Request support! They're climbing on my hull!" I couldn't rotate my turret to aim at the brother tank. I'd hit them. "Machine gunner sweep!" I ordered the cokes to fire, but it wasn't enough. "Traverse nozzle left!" I shouted. "Spray the ground behind them." "Sir, that's near friendlies." "Do as I say. Don't ignite. Spray oil. Spray the oil." We sprayed a massive amount of unlit napalm onto the empty ground about 10 meters around the brother tank. The sticky liquid covered the rocks and ground, even splashing onto several Japanese soldiers. "Now, toss a Willie Pete, white phosphorus grenade over there." I cracked the hatch and threw a grenade. Boom! A wall of fire rose around the perimeter of the brother tank. This wall not only cut off the charge of subsequent Japanese troops, but the terrifying heat wave forced back the soldiers clinging to the tank armor, or directly ignited the oil on their bodies. The trapped crew used this gap to fire their mounted machine guns wildly. "Thanks, Miller, I owe you a bottle of whiskey." We covered the infantry as they moved up to clear the area. When we inspected those spider holes, we found they were interconnected, like a giant underground maze. Regular explosives only collapsed the entrances, but our fire consumed the oxygen inside, suffocating the entire tunnel system. February 23, 1945. A day history books would write about in bold letters. That morning, we were clearing remnant bunkers on the northern slopes of Suribachi. Suddenly, an unprecedented noise erupted over the radio. Shortly after, Marines who had been huddled in shell craters nearby jumped up, pointing at the summit, cheering and jumping. Even the warships at sea sounded their sirens. I opened the hatch and looked up at the towering volcanic cone. Against a gray sky and black volcanic rock, a small, vivid stars and stripes was fluttering in the wind. In that moment, my throat tightened. That was hope. That was the proof of our blood and sacrifice. "They did it," Johnson muttered in the driver's compartment. "We took the damn mountain." I wanted to cheer too, but I looked down in front of my tank. Just at the foot of the mountain where that flag flew lay charred Japanese corpses and the shattered remains of American bodies. On the black beach, blood had congealed into dark red. The flag was glorious, but the pole was held up by the scorched earth beneath our feet. "Don't celebrate too early," I reminded my crew over the radio. "Look north." Yes, Suribachi was taken, but that was just a dot on the south of Iwo Jima. To our north lay the Motoyama Plateau. That was Kuribayashi's main defensive belt. There lay the meat grinder, airfield number 2, and countless deeper, stronger fortresses. That flag gave us 5 minutes of respite and emotion. 5 minutes later, the war continued. After the battle for Suribachi, our 8 Zippo tanks were all wounded. We withdrew to the beach for brief repairs. It was there I received an urgent letter from Hawaii. It was from Colonel Unmacht, sent via field mail. The letter was short, devoid of bureaucratic tone. Captain Miller, Marine Commander General Holland Smith just wired me. His words were, "If you can give me 100 more of these tanks, I can take this island in 2 weeks." U-8 tanks proved the concept. Washington has approved my crazy plan. The production lines are running at full speed. More POACWSH-1 tanks are on the way, along with more advanced models. Hold on, you are changing warfare. I folded the letter and looked at the mechanics welding track links. Hear that, boys? I patted the armor plate. We're getting brothers. At that time, I didn't know that eventually 354 of these Sherman tanks would be converted. We 8 pioneers, in the darkest days of Iwo Jima, had burned a breach in the Japanese iron bucket defense with fire. According to post-war statistics, in the first few days alone, our 8 tanks destroyed over 200 heavy Japanese bunkers. Without the 150-yard reach of Hell's Breath, the Marine casualty list might have been thousands of names longer. But now, I had to face reality. My tank engine was leaking oil, the main gun sight was broken, and ahead, the terrifying line known as the Motoyama meat grinder was waiting for us. The terrain there was flatter, which meant Japanese anti-tank guns had better fields of fire. The bunkers there were no longer earth and wood, but reinforced concrete a meter thick. "Fill the tanks," I told the engineer, tossing away my cigarette butt. "It's not over yet." The flag waved behind us, but we had to drive into the sea of fire once more. The fall of Mount Suribachi didn't end the campaign. It didn't even make it easier. On the contrary, when we turned our tracks north and drove into the place called Motoyama Plateau, we truly understood what kind of quagmire Kuribayashi was dragging us into. This place didn't look like Earth. It was filled with grotesque rocks, fissures spraying sulfur steam, and desolate gray plains. No trees, no grass, just volcanic rock turned over countless times by artillery. The Marines gave this area several chilling names: the meat grinder, Turkey Knob, the amphitheater. On February 25th, we received orders to support the 3rd Marine Division in attacking the line near airfield number 2. "It's too quiet here," my driver Johnson whispered. It was indeed quiet, but not the silence of peace, rather the low pressure before a storm. Our tank traveled over the pitted volcanic rock, making a harsh metal-on-stone grinding sound. Suddenly, a rapid thump-thump-thump broke the silence. It wasn't aimed at us. On our right flank, a squad of infantry was trying to cross a pile of rubble. Several well-hidden Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns opened fire simultaneously, forming a crossfire web with no blind spots. I watched 5 or 6 Marines get torn to shreds in an instant. 9 o'clock, rock fissure. I searched through the periscope, but that was the horror of Motoyama. You couldn't find them. The Japanese no longer relied on single bunkers. They built machine gun positions inside natural rock crevices, revealing only a fist-sized firing hole. Moreover, these positions were connected by tunnels. You blow one up, they pop out of another. It's a maze, I gritted my teeth. A maze that eats people. Conventional shelling was useless here. Naval gunfire shattered the rocks, but that only created more cover for the Japanese. The only solution, again, was fire. But this time, our Zippo tanks alone weren't enough. Because the terrain was so complex, if we went in alone, Japanese infantry hiding in blind spots would blow our tracks with magnetic mines. We needed a new way to fight, an absolutely brutal take-no-prisoners way. On this plateau, the most famous infantry tank coordination tactic of the Pacific War was born: blowtorch and corkscrew. We were the blowtorch, and the corkscrew, those were the maniac engineers driving armored bulldozers. That afternoon, attacking a fortified point at the base of Hill 382, I saw the power of this combination for the first time. The strong point was a semi-buried concrete bunker surrounded by spider holes. The Marines had charged it several times and been beaten back. "Hell's Breath, in position," I reported over the radio. Behind me followed a D8 bulldozer fitted with armor plating. Its operator was almost completely retracted behind the steel plate, observing through a narrow slit. "Captain Miller, clear the way for us," the dozer operator shouted over the radio. "Roger, all hands, wet shot prep." I turned the turret toward the bunker, distance 110 yards. This range put us just inside the sighting dead zone of Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns using the terrain, but our napalm could reach easily. Spray. Huge pressure sprayed dozens of gallons of napalm onto the bunker's surface. Immediately after, I ignited it. Fire instantly swallowed the bunker, but I knew the Japanese inside might have retreated behind blast doors deep inside or fled into connecting tunnels. The fire suppressed them, consumed the oxygen, and incapacitated them temporarily, but it might not kill everyone. This was when the corkscrew came in. While the fire was still burning, that massive bulldozer rumbled past my flank. It didn't attack the enemy. It lowered its giant blade. Pushing tons of volcanic ash and rock like a moving mountain, it pressed toward the smoking bunker entrance. If the Japanese tried to run out now, they'd be cut down by our machine guns. If they stayed inside, they faced a more hopeless fate. The bulldozer pushed tons of dirt directly over the bunker's firing slit and entrance, then drove back and forth to compact it. In just minutes, that deadly firing point was completely sealed. The Japanese inside were buried alive in the grave they had dug themselves. No gunshots, just the muffled sound of earth being packed down. Done. Next, the bulldozer reversed, turning to the next target. This tactic was incredibly efficient and incredibly cruel. We advanced inch by inch across Motoyama Plateau. Every step forward meant sealing a hole. We didn't accept surrender, and they didn't plan to surrender. We were simply, systematically burying an army. However, not all battles were one-sided slaughters. At the amphitheater, we encountered the stiffest resistance. It was a natural bowl-shaped terrain surrounded by towering rock walls. The Japanese had placed heavy anti-tank guns and complex flanking fire here. Any tank entering the bowl bottom became a target. March 1st. Only 5 of our 8 Zippos were still mobile. The others either had broken tracks or hydraulic system failures. We were ordered to take out a massive fortress on the south side of the amphitheater. Intelligence said it was a command center controlling the surrounding defensive web. If we attack that fortress, we have to expose ourselves to flanking fire. I pointed at the map during the briefing. That's why we need your range. A Marine major with bloodshot eyes looked at me. Standard Shermans have to get within 50 yards to penetrate it. They'd be blown up long before that. But you can fire from 150 yards. That's the only window. The operation began at dawn. We rushed out of cover under a smoke screen. Even with the smoke, I could hear the scream of shells slicing the air. "Left track hit, but still moving," Johnson shouted. "Don't stop. Stop and we die." We reached the designated firing position. Distance to target, 145 yards. This was the limit. The fortress was as big as a small hill, with 3 machine gun slits and a gun emplacement on the front. "Mixer, give me max pressure. Even if it blows the tube, spray it. Pressure redlining, ready?" I took a deep breath and pulled the trigger. Hell's Breath let out the most violent roar of its service life. The flight time of that fire dragon seemed incredibly long. I watched it cross a mine-filled open field, pass several burning jeep wrecks, and slam accurately into that massive fortress. First shot hit. Flames covered the entire front like a waterfall. But I didn't stop. Keep going. Dump everything we have. We sprayed continuously for a full 20 seconds. This was a violation of protocol. It would overheat the barrel. But in that moment, nobody cared. A full 300 gallons of napalm were dumped on that point. The intense heat even detonated the ammunition stored inside the fortress. Boom! With an earth-shattering noise, a corner of the reinforced concrete roof was actually blown off. A massive fireball rose into the sky, even more spectacular than the explosions we caused on D-Day. The Marines covering us erupted in cheers. But just as we prepared to retreat, tragedy struck. My wingman, the brother tank that had fought beside me all this time, was a beat slow due to track damage. A Japanese 47mm anti-tank gun, which had held its fire until this very moment, revealed its fangs. It was hidden behind a rock on our right, less than 80 yards away. The first AP round hit the side of the brother tank's turret. If it hadn't been for the napalm, this might have been just a heavy hit. The crew might have had a chance to bail out, but it was a Zippo. It carried hundreds of gallons of highly volatile fuel in its belly. I will never forget that sight. No screams, no struggle. The instant the shell drilled into the turret, the entire tank turned into a white sun. The shockwave of the explosion rocked Hell's Breath violently. Dozens of meters away, the heat wave instantly scorched all brush within a huge radius. When we looked back, there was no tank, only a pile of twisted, glowing red scrap metal, still spewing violent blue-white flames. That was the color of burning aluminum soap mixture. My good friend, Tank Commander Bill Harris, and those 4 young boys were vaporized instantly. The radio was dead silent. "Sir," my gunner's voice trembled. "Don't look." I forced myself to turn my eyes forward. Reverse, back to cover. That night, sitting in the bunker, I held the bottle of whiskey Bill owed me. I didn't drink it. I just poured it onto the black volcanic ash. We were dragons. We breathed fire. But we also sat on powder kegs. That was the price. Unmacht's weapon was a genius design and a devil's pact. The destruction of that command center opened a fatal breach in the Japanese defense on Motoyama Plateau. In the days that followed, the American offensive surged in like a tide. More importantly, the reinforcements promised by Unmacht finally arrived. In early March, a new batch of factory-modified M4 Sherman tanks landed. Unlike our 8 makeshift prototypes, these new vehicles came off a standardized production line in Hawaii. They had better protection, more stable CBH-1 systems, and even periscopes optimized for flame operations. I watched column after column of brand new Zippos drive past our battered camp, feeling a mix of emotions. "This is the future, Miller." My battalion commander patted my shoulder. "This is the future you and Bill proved possible." These 354 flame tanks, though not all had arrived yet, completely changed the final phase of the Pacific War. In the last 2 weeks on Iwo Jima, it was no longer a battle, but a systematic cleansing. The Japanese still resisted, but faced with hundreds of steel monsters capable of spraying fire 150 yards, their underground Great Wall turned into a continuous crematorium. I read in a report that in just 1 week in March, these tanks consumed over 10,000 gallons of napalm. Every gallon meant a conquered bunker, a few surviving American infantrymen, and a few Japanese soldiers vanishing in flames. By mid-March, we finally saw the ocean to the north. That day, I parked Hell's Breath by a cliff. Although my tank was battered, the main gun barrel, the dummy one, bent, it was still alive. The sea below was turbulent, still that intoxicating blue. Behind me, the entirety of Iwo Jima had turned into a charred black ruin. The air still held that smell, the smell I would never escape for the rest of my life. The Battle of Iwo Jima was ending. But this wasn't the end of the war. Okinawa was waiting. The Japanese mainland was waiting, and I knew, after this battle, the form of war had changed forever. We no longer charged with bayonets and courage. We leveled all obstacles with industrialized fire. "Ready, sir?" Johnson asked me. "Heard the next stop is Okinawa." I touched the hot armor plate. "As long as they give us gas," I whispered, "we can burn to the ends of hell." March 26th, 1945. The gunfire on Iwo Jima finally thinned out. We completed the final sweep at a place called the Bloody Gorge on the northern tip of the island. The remnant Japanese forces had lost unified command. Scattered in the last caves, they either held onto the resolve to kill themselves with their last bullet or attempted meaningless banzai charges at night. My hell's breath looked like a ghost just returned from the underworld. The left track fender was completely gone. The hull was draped with sandbags shredded by shrapnel, and the dummy main gun barrel was covered in black soot. "Sir, that's the last hole." Johnson stopped the tank in front of an unassuming rock fissure. There was no movement from the cave, no machine gun fire, not even the sound of breathing. "Do we burn it?" the gunner asked. His voice was full of exhaustion. For the past 36 days, we had repeated this motion countless times. Aim, spray, ignite. "Burn it," I ordered, voice cold and hard. "We can't risk sending infantry to check." The final fire dragon spewed forth. No screams came back. Maybe the people inside were already dead. Maybe they had fled long ago. The fire burned in the silence, making a crackling sound. Later that day, it was officially announced that the Battle of Iwo Jima was over. 36 days. Just 36 days. We had advanced only a few miles on the map, but it felt like walking through a century. When I finally killed the engine, climbed out of the turret, and took off the helmet I had worn for over a month, the sea breeze blew through my hair. For the first time, I realized the smell of corpses and napalm was so thick that even the ocean wind couldn't blow it away. After the battle, we were withdrawn to Guam for rest and refit. There, I had the chance to see the preliminary statistics of the campaign. Behind these cold numbers were footnotes to everything we had experienced on that black island. A lieutenant colonel from Theater Intelligence found me. He was writing a report on the combat effectiveness of the POACWSH-1 tank. "Captain Miller, do you know what you guys did?" He pushed a file toward me. "Look at these numbers." The report contained staggering statistics. During the Battle of Iwo Jima, led by our 8 tanks, with reinforcements later, in coordination with the Marines, a total of over 1,000 reinforced Japanese bunkers and underground fortifications were destroyed. According to our assessment, the colonel pointed to a line in bold, "Without your flame tanks, infantry casualties attempting to breach these lines would have increased by at least 5,000 men, maybe more." 5,000 men. I closed my eyes, and the faces of those young Marines floated in my mind. Many of them remained on that black beach, but more, precisely because we cleared the path with fire, were able to board the ships home alive. The report also noted that about 30% of Japanese casualties on Iwo Jima were directly or indirectly caused by flamethrower weapons. This included death by burning, suffocation, and being shot while forced out of fortifications. It was an asymmetric slaughter. The underground Great Wall the Japanese were so proud of turned into their own oven in the face of our high-pressure liquid fire. Colonel Unmacht was right. The lieutenant colonel closed the folder. This weapon changed the rules of the game. Bunkers we used to fill with human lives, we now take with a few hundred gallons of gas. I lit a cigarette and looked out at the busy harbor. "The price is that we turned into devils, sir." The officer looked at me, his expression complex. "That was to end the war, Captain. It is a necessary evil." The success at Iwo Jima completely ignited the demand for flame tanks among the U.S. top brass. Previous doubts vanished. Bureaucrats in Washington no longer viewed Unmact's plan as a mad science experiment, but as the essential key to conquering the Japanese mainland. At Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, production lines began running at full capacity. I learned shortly after that, based on our combat feedback from Iwo Jima, Colonel Unmacht finalized the system. The new tanks had thicker armor, advanced electronic firing systems, and larger fuel reserves. Eventually, 354 Sherman tanks were converted into flamethrower tanks. This was a massive army of arsonists. The U.S. Army even formed the first and only armored battalion in human history composed entirely of flame tanks, the 713 Tank Battalion, and in the subsequent Battle of Okinawa, these latecomers took our tactics to the extreme. In Okinawa, the tanks of the 713th burned through the Shuri line. They were no longer used piecemeal as support like we were, but as a primary assault cluster. It was said that in Okinawa, if infantry saw a cave ahead, they wouldn't even fire. They'd just turn back and yell, "Call the Zippos!" The nickname Zippo went from soldier slang to a standard term in U.S. tactical manuals. It represented a force of absolute destruction, an unreasonable engineering violence. Colonel Unmacht's persistence forever changed modern siege tactics. He proved that in industrialized total war, no defensive line is impregnable, as long as your fire sprays far enough and hot enough. August 1945. We were preparing for the next campaign, Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese mainland. According to the plan, those 354 flame tanks would all be thrown into the battles of Kyushu and the Kanto Plain. Intelligence indicated the Japanese mainland had more caves, more underground works, and a population mobilized for total war. "If we land," my new partner, a young second lieutenant, said to me, "we'll burn all of Japan to the ground." This wasn't rhetoric. It was the tactical plan. However, two lights brighter than our napalm rose over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The atomic bomb ended the war. When I heard the news of Japan's surrender, I was sitting in a repair shop on Okinawa, looking at my Hell's Breath. It had been repainted, fitted with new tracks, ready for the final showdown, but it would never need to spew fire again. In that moment, soldiers around me were cheering, firing guns into the air. But I just leaned quietly against the cold tracks and wept. Unmacht's monsters had completed their mission. They saved countless American lives and accelerated the collapse of fascism in the most brutal way possible. 1985, 40 years after the war ended. I live in a small town in the Midwest, running a hardware store. My neighbors only know I used to drive tanks, maybe won a few medals, but no one knows the details, except on Veterans Day. On that day, I put on that old uniform, though it's a bit tight now. I go to the local cemetery and lay flowers for a few old friends. Sometimes, late at night, when the logs in the fireplace crackle and spark, I still return to that black beachhead. I see that orange-red fire dragon slicing through the sky, hear the hiss of napalm burning on rocks, and smell that indescribable sweet, scorched scent. Historians now write in books that the Battle of Iwo Jima was the bloodiest meat grinder of the Pacific War, and that American flame tanks were the critical godsend that broke the stalemate. They praise our efficiency with cold data: 354 tanks, 150-yard range, 1,000 bunkers, 5,000 lives. They are right. If we hadn't done that, my grandson might never have been born, because I would have died on that island. We had no choice. To climb out of hell, we had to set fire to it. I never regret what we did. Facing an enemy that stubborn, that mad, mercy would have been cruelty to my own comrades. Colonel Unmacht didn't give us a weapon. He gave us a ticket to survival. But I still pray. I pray that this world never needs Zippo tanks again. I pray that no young soldier ever has to watch another human being struggle in flames from that distance ever again. I close the iron gate of the fireplace, blocking the flames inside. Outside the window, peaceful sunlight shines on the lawn. That is the piece we burned out of the earth.